Racing has been good to John Arthur Brabham, son of a Sydney greengrocer. Even at an early age, there's some evidence that he was fond of fast-moving vehicles.
I left school and got a job in a garage as a mechanic. I'd done an engineering course and I only got 2 years of it done, and joined the Air Force as a mechanic.
So Jack came out of the Air Force after the war, started in an engineering business of his own, buying and selling second-hand cars. And then he started racing. A friend of his introduced him to midget oval racing.
I managed to win the third race I started in and never looked back from there.
When speed car racing was one of the biggest attractions in the minds of the general public. Crowds upward of 30,000 people were commonplace on big nights, and speed car racing's huge following was well supported by the mainstream media. The sport of speedway was booming, and speed car racing was the catalyst. The drivers were tough men who lived life to the fullest and very much in the fast lane, despite the obvious dangers of open cockpit speed car racing.
Well, I started off midget car racing on cinder tracks in Australia, which is the sort of racing that's done a lot in America and Australia. It was towards the end of 1947, what we call the 47-48 season out there, because the season used to start about September and go till about April. And that was really my start, and I had about 6 years of cinder track driving before I ventured out into road racing. After driving so many years on cinder tracks, hanging the tail out was really the way that, or the only way to get around a cinder circuit. And of course, having the tail hanging out was really my style of driving. That's the way I thought it should be done. But of course, I soon learnt in Europe that the type of road racing and more sophisticated cars that we were driving, that this wasn't the way to do it. My first event was on Easter Monday, 1955, and probably I made my first big mistake in motor racing, really coming to England by not bringing the Cooper Bristol car that I had in Australia at the time.
Monaco Grand Prix, 100 laps of nearly 2 miles. Leading early on was French champion Jean Barnyard in a Ferrari. Sterling Moss Cooper on his heels. There was a triple crash soon after the start. Nobody hurt. Cars involved: Lotus, Ferrari, Porsche. Moss was soon in the lead and might well have won, but transmission trouble made him retire. Other Coopers were still going great guns. Last lap and ahead of Tony Brooks' Ferrari was Jack Brabham. He hurled his Cooper over the line.
I won the Monaco Grand Prix, and being my first Grand Prix win, naturally this stuck in my mind for a long time and was really a sense of achievement that every young driver really had an ambition for.
On a perfect day, a great crowd at Aintree saw the starters, including Sterling Moss BRM, getting set for the 12th RAC British Grand Prix. That great Australian driver, Jack Brabham, was driving a Cooper Climax. Tony Brooks in a Van Wall and Roy Salvadori Aston Martin were among the well-fancied, but all 24 lining up for the start were drivers of championship class. From the getaway, Brabham shot ahead, determined to keep the number 12 out in front, and so strengthen his claim to be world champion this season. Sterling Moss drove his BRM superbly, battled into second place but couldn't overtake Brabham. Roy Salvadori was close up with the leaders. Tony Brooks had to retire after 12 laps. With only 45 miles to go, 15 laps, Moss had to change a wheel, a delay fatal to his winning chance. Little to fear now, Brabham had the race in his pocket, though Sterling Moss was still giving chase. Jack Brabham won, covering the 225 miles at an average of just under 90 miles an hour. Aintree's genial owner, Mrs. Topham, garlanded the winner. Congratulations to Brabham on a great display.
On my first trip across to New Zealand, I met the McLaren family, and I was able to use their workshop to work on the car, and got to know them very well. And of course met Bruce, and Bruce was only a young kid at that time.
Jack enjoyed a wonderful relationship with Bruce's parents to the extent that he looked on them as his New Zealand mother and father, which was great. And Bruce got selected for the New Zealand Driver to Europe scheme, and Jack was most supportive of that.
And I was able to get him into the Cooper team, and it was great seeing Bruce doing so well.
When Bruce came over, Jack, I think, was very much his mentor and took him under his wing. An Antipodes partnership from Australia and from New Zealand. Bruce McLaren must have owed a great deal to Jack.
And Jack enjoyed it as well, because I think he got a kick out of helping a young driver get started.
By December, Jack Brabham is the leader in the World Drivers' Championship, and the United States Grand Prix at Sebring is the final race of the series. Only one other driver, Sterling Moss, has a chance of beating Brabham for the championship if he can win this race. In the early stages, it's Moss first, Brabham second. In the middle stages, Sterling Moss pulls out with mechanical trouble, and Jack Brabham has only to complete the course to win the World Championship. Bruce McLaren, number 9, has moved into second place, and the race is dominated by the Cooper Works team.
Bruce and I led the race for quite some time, right up to the last lap.
With only one lap to go, Brabham looks a certain winner.
On the last lap, I was leading and Bruce was behind me, and sadly my car ran out of petrol about half a mile from the end. And Bruce drew up alongside me and looked at me and made us say, well, you know, what are you going to do? I couldn't do anything but just coast to a stop.
Brabham was in trouble on the final straight.
And I eventually stopped about 100 yards from the finishing line, and I started pushing. If anybody assisted me, I'd be disqualified.
And Bruce McLaren at 22 is the youngest driver ever to win an international Grand Prix. In an atmosphere of great excitement, Jack Brabham pushes his car across the line in 4th place.
At that time, of course, when I pushed the car over the line, I didn't realise what position I was as far as the World Championship was concerned. It was a big thrill to me to find out, after I was exhausted on the ground, and found out that I'd actually won the championship. It was a fantastic thing.
Jack, as far as I know, you ran out of petrol on the last lap.
That's right, yeah.
What did it feel like at that very moment?
Well, I felt terrible, but I knew that my old mate Bruce was close behind.
Now, what are they going to say in Australia when they hear this, or New Zealand, Ronnie?
I don't know what they're going to say in Australia, but I think they'll be fairly pleased in New Zealand, Ronnie.
What's he going to have to say about it?
Well, it looks like we're both very pleased, that's all right.
And there they go, the starters in the 12th Annual International Trophy Race at Silverstone on 150 miles of really fast motoring. And somewhere well up with the leaders is the man we've come to meet, Jack Brabham, world champion driver and a mechanic of rare skill who knows all there is to know about tuning and preparing racing cars. He and Cooper's engineers have worked many weeks getting this new model ready for its first appearance at the practice for the race.
Jack Brabham, with Cooper, was responsible for the transformation in Formula One, where the engines went from in front of the driver to behind the driver.
All racing cars are, of course, fitted with disc brakes, but Cooper's were one of the first to use them on Grand Prix cars. Jack is always around personally to supervise any last-minute adjustments, and with him, as always, is a Cooper mechanic, affectionately known as Gin.
3 minutes to go. 3 minutes to go.
Over on the grid, officials and mechanics were crowding round the cars as they were being pushed into position. Jack eases himself into his car, which looks for all the world as if it had been built round him, which indeed it had. Sterling Moss takes the lead in the early stages, with Innes Ireland in second place and Jack lying third. When Moss retired with broken suspension, Ireland moved into first place and Brabham into second. And that's how it stayed till the end of the race. When it's all over, it's back to the pits again and a word with the boss. We'd love to know what Jack whispered in John Cooper's ear, but we shall never know. Racing's thirsty work, and he knocked back a well-earned drink while having a word with his wife. This is where we'd like to have interviewed Jack Brabham and the man who builds Cooper cars. But as you see, they were far too busy. We did, however, manage to catch up with them later at the garage in Surbiton, where 5 years ago the world-beating association between Jack Brabham and the Cooper Car Company first began.
This is where we build our racing cars, and there are literally hundreds of component parts that go to building a racing car. And one of the most important of those is the brake linings. And who better to tell you about brake linings than world champion Jack Brabham?
Well, as far as racing cars are concerned, it's quite a serious business, and we spend a lot of time and money building racing cars to go as fast as we can. And from the driver's seat, when we're racing, one thing that's probably overlooked by many people or don't seem to realise it, the most important part is being able to stop at the end of a big long straight.
Well, that's what Jack thinks about the importance of brakes in Grand Prix driving. And remember, he talks as a qualified engineer, not just as a brilliant driver.
Australia's leading drivers and world champion Jack Brabham are off in the Moomba Trophy at Phillip Island. Brabham's in car number 4, and soon after the start he passes Devlin to go to the lead. It's a 24-mile course of 8 3-mile laps, and despite the sharp bends, Brabham sets a lap record of 2 minutes 7 seconds. There he goes, followed by Bill Patterson, also driving a Cooper Climax. They hit top speed on the straight, but there's trouble at a corner. Murray Carter in a Corvette goes off the track in a cloud of dust. His car spins and he's thrown 20 feet in the air. There's a rush to help him, but he's quite okay. Last lap now, and Brabham's still leading. He averages 82 miles an hour in another record-breaking win.
Thrills at the French Grand Prix start the moment the flag drops. Hill's BRM in the front row fails to start. Plantignon's Cooper rams it, Halford's Cooper goes into a spin, and Bianchi's Cooper pulls away with a crushed radiator cowl. Somehow the mess sorts itself out, though there's some hasty patching up for the pit stop to do. From the very first lap, it's an all-out battle between the British and Italian machines. World champion Jack Brabham, number 16, is well up, and Bruce McLaren and Innes Island. Brabham's Cooper and Phil Hill's Ferrari battle desperately to get a nose in front of each other, with the rest of the field trailing behind, sometimes losing the way. But in the end, it's Jack Brabham who gets the upper hand, streaking ahead for his 3rd consecutive Grand Prix victory at a record speed for the course of 131.7 miles per hour. The Italians are nowhere. First 8 places go to British machines. And for Jack, one more step towards retaining the world crown.
21 star drivers roared off in Heat 1 of the Brussels Grand Prix. It's rare for anything to go wrong so early, but a triple crash came here. Flockhart, Gendebien and Brooks colliding. Not much interest left in the race for them. Sterling Moss led. Driving a Porsche, German car, he was too fast for the rest. Nearest rival, world champion Jack Brabham in a Cooper. And 51 seconds ahead of him, Moss won the heat. During the second heat, it was raining, with Brabham now faster than Moss, who couldn't corner so well. Challenging both was the French ace, Trintignant. Moss went pretty well till he had gearbox trouble. Then, with the best time for both heats, the winner was once again Jack Brabham, Australian driver, British car.
In 1960, Jack won the championship again. So he was now a double world champion.
And that, of course, really proved to everybody that we had the right idea with the engine in the back.
Brabham is world champion for the 2nd year running, so the motor racing fraternity awarded him their gold star. Mike Taylor, who injured his neck when racing, and John and Charles Cooper, designers of the famous car, were among the better-known folk present. Ron Flockhart, Brian Lister, and the Assemble Company saw Jack receive the gold star from Mike Cooper, one of the club's vice presidents. There was a word of congratulation from the club's president-in-chief, the Duke of Edinburgh. Jack Brabham's earned it all.
For the big money and the big names in motor racing, we fly north to Auckland, our largest city. Here in January each year is run the New Zealand International Grand Prix, an event which brings drivers from Britain, the United States, Sweden, the continent and Australia into competition against the New Zealanders. Today is race day, and though the sky is overcast, the ground is packed. Some people have spent all night camped outside the gates. There's a crowd of 60,000 here and 15,000 cars jam the parking lots. Tipped as one of the favourites, Ron Flockhart is driving a Cooper. So is Bruce McLaren, who carries number 47. At the wheel of his Lotus is England's Roy Salvadori, watched by Bonnier of Sweden and Sterling Moss. Number 4, a Cooper, is driven by the world's champion driver Jack Brabham, who has 2 New Zealand Grand Prix to his credit. The crowd is on its toes, dressed for the weather and looking forward to an exciting race. There are 24 starters, 14 of them from overseas. The Grand Prix competitors are ready to roll. They'll make 75 circuits of a 2-mile track, 150 miles of hard driving. There'll be no stops for refueling. They travel in a bunch over the first lap. At College Corner, McLaren in number 47 is taking the lead, with Moss chasing him and Brabham right behind. Moss makes the break and goes through to take the number 1 position. Brabham is in second place now, McLaren lies third. Moss keeps his lead until the 31st lap, when a broken transmission puts him out of the race. Brabham, number 4, is out in front, holding a 50-yard lead from Bruce McLaren in 47. It's settled down to a battle between these two for first place. You can count the rest of the field up. Brabham is having trouble with his engine, and McLaren tries to narrow the lead. Along the back straight, the heat of the track is producing severe haze. Brabham still has the lead, nursing his sick engine, but keeping 100 yards ahead of McLaren. It's all over as they approach the finish line. Brabham and McLaren have driven a great race. Jack Brabham flashes past the flag. He set a new record, 1 hour, 40 minutes. McLaren finishes only 1 second behind.
At the drivers' meeting, we saw young Ricardo Rodriguez with his yellow helmet, Joe Bonnier, Jim Clark, Bruce McLaren, all awaiting the off. The Ferraris were on home ground, had the most powerful engines, and the opposition all had old or underdeveloped new engines. I expected Ferrari to dominate. Only Jack Brabham had the new V8 engine, but it was not expected to last, as he, like Moss, had been suffering from overheating problems in practice. On the grid were Von Trips, Rodriguez, then Ginther and Phil Hill. Off the line, the extremely tall gearing of the Ferraris gave their opposition a chance to tuck in behind them. At the end of the first lap, the order was Phil Hill, Ginther, Rodriguez, Clark, Brabham, Von Trips, Baghetti, Bonnier, Gurney and Moss. The racing was frantic. Positions were changing constantly. At the end of this straight, Clark and Von Trips collided. Clark spun to a rest, but the Ferrari went up the grass banking. Tragically, Von Trips and 14 spectators were killed.
In Jack's day, it was by no means unusual for 4 or 5 drivers to be killed every season. The cars were mobile death traps. They didn't have safety belts, and the general attitude then was the throttle works both ways. It shuts as well as opens. And if you can't take the heat, keep out of the kitchen. So you can argue that you needed a lot more courage in those days than you do now. And Jack has certainly never been short of that.
My dad's attitude towards it, he was always confident in what he did, and he never left home saying, well, I might not see you again or anything like that. I can't say it wasn't a worry, because it was, there's no question about that, but you know, you just dealt with it.
This is the Brabham mansion in Surrey, England, where he lives with his wife and children, the epitome of a successful businessman.
Jack's always been very astute on the business side in a very quiet sort of way.
In fact, Jack Brabham is now the world's largest manufacturer of racing cars.
I decided to set up my own team. I brought Ron Tauranac across from Australia.
Sells between 80 and 100 racing cars a year.
And they started building racing cars. Ron Tauranac designed them. Jack contributed to the design and the engineering, and Jack raced Brabham cars.
It certainly staggered everybody overseas to see an engine come from Australia.
Jack Brabham and Denny Holm discussed with Roy Billington engine torque and gear ratios prior to their appearance at Sandown Motor Racing Circuit. A close association has developed between the world champion and Repco. Jack's regular visits to Melbourne have helped to keep Repco in touch with some of the finer details of overseas motor racing developments. On this trip, Frank Hallam shows Jack some of the production techniques being used to produce the racing engines. Jack has brought several of his top racing mechanics with him from England to prepare his cars. Here they are working side by side with the Repco men who are producing the engines, gaining valuable knowledge and experience in the process, and in return giving their Australian counterparts something of the active service background of international motor racing.
Start of the French Grand Prix, destined to be the fastest Grand Prix of all time on a road circuit. And amongst the racing cars, veteran driving ace Jack Brabham in a machine of his own design and make.
From a whole career achievement, the fact of winning the first Grand Prix in a Brabham car at Reims at that time was probably the most satisfying race I think I've ever had, a sense of achievement.
Now it was Brabham's turn to take the lead and smash the track record at 138.65 miles an hour. Flashing across the line to take the checkered flag, Brabham also shot to the top of the championship driving table.
Silverstone fans had a good look at the 3-litre Formula One cars, a BRM engine here, and saw Jack Brabham approving the Brabham Repco he was driving in the 18th Daily Express Trophy. In sparkling form so far this year with Ferraris, John Surtees back at the wheel after his accident, and the odds were that today's trophy winner would be one of the two, Surtees or Brabham. 13 started, representing 7 countries, 35 laps of the 3-mile circuit. Brabham took command early and looked unlikely to be passed. It was victory for Brabham, Surtees second. Max Aitken presented the trophy. Jack's got off to a flying start for the season.
At Zandvoort, Holland, world interest now focused on the Repco Brabham cars. The circuit has been modified for the Dutch Grand Prix to cope with cars of the new Formula One. With Jack again in the pole spot, 17 machines set off over the dunes before an excited audience. Jack, number 16, forges ahead of Jim Clark, who was soon troubled with a hot engine. Jack's Repco Brabham is performing beautifully. He's maintaining a steady pressure and is well on the way to achieving his 3rd consecutive Grand Prix victory. Retires shortly with ignition trouble after an excellent performance.
1966 was Jack Brabham's year. Here he wins the Dutch Grand Prix and more points towards his World Championship.
With only 3 Grand Prix to go, it now seems certain that an Australian driver in an Australian car will carry off the World Championship this year.
It was a thrill to not only build your own car, but to race it and win races with it was terrific.
The only man ever to win the World Driving Championship in a car of his own design. And now, Brabham the manufacturer is as famous as Brabham the driver.
And winning the World Championship in '66 was really the pinnacle of the whole thing, because to win the championship with an Australian-made engine was a fantastic feather in our cap, I think.
Jack receives the club's gold medal for his unique double, the manufacturer's and driver's title. Jack has also been invested with the OBE by the Queen of England during this fantastic year.
He was the first racing driver to be knighted. I can tell you it put a few English noses out of joint.
Success never went to his head. He was never pretentious. He just got on with the job no matter what job was at hand. Jack helped not only myself, but Bruce to such an enormous extent.
Now, McLaren obviously was started by New Zealander Bruce McLaren, with whom Jack had a very close friendship.
McLaren and Holm ran 1-2 in their orange Chevrolets for the entire race.
Bruce was a fine engineer as well. In many ways, that's why they were so compatible and such good friends. They both thought very much alike.
I say, well, yeah, maybe it could be a bit thinner, but maybe it will be a little bit lighter, but let's just leave it thick. So, yes, yeah, I'm responsible for that.
Jack has told me about the fact that he had a discussion with Bruce, discussing the fact that he might retire from Formula One and just do testing. And Jack had said to Bruce, you know, testing can be just as dangerous as racing. You know, don't think testing is safe. It's not. It all changed dramatically on June the 2nd, 1970.
Bruce was testing a big sports car down at Goodwood, and when it came lunchtime, they decided to go to a little cafe. And when they were walking across, Bruce stopped and decided he wanted to do one more lap in the car so as he could think about it while they're having lunch.
He did one lap and they went around, and then the guys that were there said it all went quiet. The rear bodywork failed, and so the car immediately out of control. So there was no chance of Bruce surviving that.
What's it feel like? Here you are. How old are you, Bruce?
22.
And you've won a Grand Prix?
I'm about as surprised as you are, I think. I didn't expect it, not for one moment.
Losing Bruce McLaren actually was probably the biggest thing that turned me towards retirement, and that really was something that really hurt.
Axles to try and stuff.
The other big problem I've got coming up, I've got a grandson who started motor racing, which is really the 3rd generation of the Brabham side.
I was pulling the choke up halfway down the straight.
Because the big aim now is to die without an enemy in the world. I'm going to outlive the bastards.
Bye.